Hello. Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Mindy Wright, a member of CMC's Board of Trustees, and it's really good to see you all here today. Today, CMC partners with WBNS 10 TV to present the second of a two-part series called Hear Me Now. Part 1 aired live on WBNS last night from 9 to 10 p.m., and today we continue the conversation. Back in the day, people my age may have experienced or observed bullying as we were growing up. But as today's technology makes it easier and easier to amplify and encourage bullies and hurtful memes, the stakes have gotten higher. WBNS 10 TV's series on this topic has brought together teens, their families, teachers, and experts to look at the issue from a range of perspectives. How can we foster safe spaces to comfort and nurture children and teens, help them build resilience, and take on the inevitable challenges of life? As Chloe, one of the teens on last night's broadcast, said, I think it's important that we all be kind to each other. So how can we foster that kindness? Let's hear from some experts. Please welcome CEO of the Boys and Girls Clubs of Columbus, Rebecca Asmo, Principal of the Arts and College Preparatory Academy, Tony Gatto, President of PFLAG Columbus, Jaron Terry, and journalist at WBNS 10 TV, Scott Light. I'll turn it over to you, Scott.
Okay. We're going to jump right into it because our guests are our stars here, and they're in some very different worlds in terms of education, nonprofit world, social activism. So let's jump right into it. And Tony, we were talking earlier, and you said you wanted to actually talk about, or at least start off with the actual definition of bullying.
Yeah. I'm going to read the Ohio Revised Code that says what bullying is. And because I think that as a school, we're bound to adhere to this, but that there are nuances to bullying that kind of get left out of this and I think are worth exploring, and I think it's a good place to start. So, harassment, intimidation, or bullying means either of the following. A, any intentional, written, verbal, electronic, or physical act that a student has exhibited towards another particular student more than once, and the behavior both, 1, causes mental or physical harm to the student, or 2, is sufficiently severe, persistent, or pervasive that it creates an intimidating, threatening, or abusive educational environment for the other student.
So let's go from there. And Rebecca, why don't you start us off? You have 10 clubs, right, in Central Ohio.
Yeah.
What do you see out there in terms of how young people are communicating with each other, how they're hopefully comforting each other at times, but also what are you seeing on the bullying front?
So, and just to kind of follow up on what Tony said, I mean, bullying is intentional harm, it's harm that's repeated, and it's something that involves a power imbalance, and I think that's important to remember. Bullying is not new. Every single person in this room has very likely been the target of bullying, has witnessed bullying, and honestly, many of us have probably at some point in our lives participated in it. And so I think that that's important to admit as part of this conversation, that it's not something that just happens to other people. This is something that we're all a part of. So Boys and Girls Clubs, we serve about 6,000 kids per year. Primarily the young people that we're serving, they're in grades K through 12, but they're coming from some pretty challenged backgrounds. So low income, living in poverty, living in single parent households. And so what that means is that they're facing challenges that are really just exacerbated. Their social capital is more limited than other young people. 40% of the kids that we serve have moved at least one time in the past year, sometimes more. They're often attending schools that have higher rates of staff turnover, and just don't have as many places to go to find the kind of support that you need. And, I think what's also a challenge in our community as we unpack this further is, we don't have enough safe spaces for kids to go that are supervised by caring adults who are professionals, who, understand what it means to create a positive climate. So, we're dealing with bullying and harassment in a lot of different ways, from traditional bullying to cyberbullying to gang violence, which we're seeing increasing quite a bit in this community over the past couple of years. And, I think we're seeing everything, but I think we're also having on top of it some added challenges, that every young person in poverty faces. What's really kind of frightening right now, though, is that the pace of our society is moving so quickly that by the time we've figured out, okay, what's the newest policy, what's the newest challenge, it's already changed. Technology and social media, you need to every 3 weeks be evaluating your policies. So I don't know that answers exactly what we're doing, but I think it's part of, my job is to help the community understand what this really means, to train our professionals about not just how do we have policies to address bullying, but how do we create how do we develop emotionally intelligent young people that can deal with their emotions and, and just navigate the world that we're in today, which is the same in many ways, but also very different.
There were many salient points there, but I'll tell you from our town hall last night, we had the superintendent of schools from Hilliard who joined us, and he said what you said about we're tackling this and cyberbullying, bullying in real time, and it's changing all of the time. So he brought that up as well in the education world. Jaron, what are you seeing out there in the LGBTQ community when it comes to bullying?
Well, among LGBTQ children, they probably have the highest rate of bullying than any group. And part of the reason for that is because in any social group, people like to other someone. Whoever's different, they're the one that is going to get bullied. And for LGBTQ children in particular, they're institutionalized bullying at the highest levels of our laws. And so when LGBTQ people are not included among the protected classes for equal rights in the state of Ohio, that certainly does set people up to say negative things that work their way down to little ears. And by little ears, I'm talking about kids as young as 3 years old. That's how young kids are when they know whether they are not straight or not cisgender. Cisgender meaning that your gender identity aligns with the biological sex that you are assigned at birth. So it's really important that if your businesses are not part of Equality Ohio's Ohio Competes, that you might want to get in there, because once we have LGBTQ people as a protected class in Ohio, I think that's going to go a long way for, it might take another 10 or 20 years, but for them to be more accepted and affirmed. One
of the things we tried to do before we put together that town hall from last night, we aired a 4-part series on bullying and cyberbullying. And one of the things that once we got into research and started news gathering for that series, and Tony, you start us off here. When I talked to high schoolers and I asked them, I said, okay, if you've been bullied, would you go to your parents? And I had a group of 8 high schoolers in front of me, and overwhelmingly it was no, no, no. And every one of them said no. And then I said, well, would you go to a teacher or an administrator? And they said that would only compound the problem and make it worse. So where's that, how do we bridge that trust gap with young people and with educators and with their own parents?
Well, you have to create an environment in the school where the students feel safe coming to the teachers and administrators. And that, I think that there are lots of different ways to do that. It could be as simple as putting a sign on a door that says safe space, or it can be things that you're saying about
Rainbow flag?
yes, and a lot of the safe space signs are rainbows, and they're inclusive of everybody. But I think deeper, you need to create systems in your schools that foster it on a widespread basis. So at ACPA, we are values-based, and we approach everything with 7 values. I'll see if I can get all 7 without looking. Honesty, communication, problem solving, participation, awareness, respect for diversity, and kindness. And those 2, especially when you're framing everything around these values, are contributing to that environment. So just last week, we had a class meeting, and every time we have a class meeting, we choose 1 or 2 values, and we have an open discussion about how do we practice those values in the school. And we talked about kindness last week. And we just open it up to the kids, like, how are you kind to each other? How are you kind? I posed a specific question, how are you kind to people that you don't agree with or don't understand? And how do you actually practice that? And so what we're starting to see is that they're bringing these values up in their everyday interactions with each other without us enforcing it on them. And it's becoming a pervasive attitude, like, let's practice these towards each other. Something I wanted to follow up with what you were saying about businesses, I think schools also have a responsibility to be inclusive with curriculum, because if we're starting young and we're not learning about other people, so if we don't have a curriculum that includes LGBTQ or includes history of races.
In a positive light.
In a positive light, yes. For me, that goes without saying. How are we expecting kids to understand each other, and how are we expecting kids to learn about people that are different from them? If we're not teaching that in schools, where do they get that? And so if we boil that down to, I don't understand you, I don't know how to communicate with you, and not knowing how to engage, a lot of instances of bullying arise from that. And so I think that we need to have a more inclusive state standards that include that and say that schools have to teach this so that there is inclusivity among schools.
Do you think those values are being taught? We'll get back to education in a little bit, but are those values that you mentioned, are they more or less being taught at home these days? What do you think?
I think in some homes they are, in some homes they're not.
I'd agree with that, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, if I may.
Please do.
One of the things that is so important for LGBTQ kids is that they feel supported at home, because if they're not, that's when you run into a lot of problems. And so parents really need to be conscious of what their language is when topics come up around gay issues, if you will, that they are, careful what they say, and that they make positive comments and certainly not make negative comments. I had an example of a parent who told me that the parent was affirmative, but would have preferred their child not be LGBTQ not because they didn't affirm LGBTQ people, but they knew their child would have a really difficult life if they were gay. And so when the child at a young age said, "So what if I were gay?" the parent said, "Well, that would be terrible," meaning that would be a terrible, difficult life, but what the child heard is that they would be terrible. So it's really important that we're very conscious about what we say around kids, and also that we advocate, and that means going into the schools and make sure that there are GSAs in place, or at your house of worship, make sure that you are voicing that you want your church to publicly be affirming, or find another place of worship, and also to build resilience in your child so that when they do face bullying, as let's face it, LGBTQ kids are among the most bullied, they have a sense of who else they are. They're not just a gay kid, but they're a member of the marching band, or they're a wonderful pianist, or wonderful at theater or gymnastics or whatever else they are, that they have a sense that people support them and value them for their whole selves, not just that one tiny aspect of who they are.
I think, Scott, I mean, so when we talk about home, I mean, you know, what I think is really troubling about today's society is we're much more segmented than we were in the past. So if, you know, if you're a child who lives in a poor neighborhood in Columbus, or you're born poor, you have just a 5% chance of getting to that top income quartile. And so what that means is, you know, more than half of the children that live in Franklin County are poor. And what that means is we have a huge number of young people that are living in, you know, homes oftentimes without kind of the, you know, traditional family structure for a lot of different reasons, in homes where parents are working quite a bit, working multiple jobs. Increasingly, we're having homes where parents are addicted. We're seeing that at the Boys and Girls Club more than ever. And also, you know, just schools are incredibly important. And they really are the backbone of so much that happens with young people. But there's a whole nother part of the day. I mean, a young person can spend more time in a Boys and Girls Club over the course of a year than they can in a school. But yet in Columbus, just 12% of students are accessing any kind of youth development programs in out-of-school time. And so those are really big issues. I mean, we've had, just this summer alone, I mean, we had our staff intervene a number of times with young people who were, you know, suicidal or expressing suicidal ideation. They were experiencing not just challenges with their peers, that was part of it, but they were also in situations where they were raising siblings, where they had parents who were addicted, where they didn't really have connections, you know, with any adult that they felt safe with. So while, you know, I think bullying is a piece of it, you know, we've got a society today that's not as connected, that's more unequal than it's ever been, and I think that that's something that we really need to talk about as a community. And we're seeing some of these problems, you know, that are coming about because of all of this. It's not that kids are very different. It's not that you know, kindness has changed that much. Our systems are you know, not set up to help kids have safe spaces.
Did your staff notice various behaviors or actions in those kids, or did those kids come to your staff and counselors and say, hey, I'm having a tough time?
Yeah, so it has to be a mix of both. So we do a couple things at the Boys and Girls Club. One is that we're one of the few organizations that really tracks the club member experience. That's probably one of our most important indicators. It's kind of like a customer service experience rating, but we ask kids, how safe do you feel about the club? And our goal is to have as many kids as possible report an optimal club experience, which means an A+ experience. The one indicator that impacts that the most is whether or not kids feel respected by their peers, which I think is really interesting. And you know, we can score a lot higher if we improve that. So some of that is just making sure that staff, you know, how do you supervise an area? Kids are most likely to be bullied in a bathroom, in a hallway where somebody's not supervised, in an entrance to the club, and it's the same in schools and any other organization. And so you need to make sure, how are those spaces actually being supervised? Because a lot of times, you know, kids just need adults to intervene. And then it's also, though, you know, it's important for us, and this is a struggle with any organization, but we have to be very mindful of staff turnover, because when you have a high amount of staff turnover, you know, kids just aren't able to develop those bonds with people. And then we have to really drill into our staff practices that will help kids feel safe. Sometimes it's as simple as, you know, a kid being greeted by name every single day and having an adult that knows one thing about their life. That can make a difference. You know, just making sure that all of us are practicing those in our own lives, but I also think those are things that we can instill in our own kids and in our own community.
Maybe a broad brush question, but I'd like for the three of you to try to get to it. this is an enabler of a whole lot of things, great things at times, but again, the instantaneous nature of whether it's a text or a Facebook page or whatever, that can also lead to issues. I asked the three of you earlier, I said, do you think we as just human beings, have we lost our way a little bit when it comes to being kind and being tolerant and accepting of people?
Well, I think that when you see such a disparity among groups, and of course now I'm talking about politics, kids see that too. And so they are, if they're reading comments online, they're seeing how adults are talking to one another, and so they probably are modeling some of that, I would think.
Tony?
I think that there's been a lack of kindness for as long as I can remember. I can remember in my own high school experiences. I think I do what I do because I saw bullying happen and I saw teachers not address it. And I'll tell a story, and this is in the 90s. I can remember watching a group of girls block a student from walking down the hall, and this student was Indian, and she physically different. And I remember, like, she would rush to classes, and students would make fun of her for rushing to classes, and they one day just decided to, like, not let her block. And I watched this happen, and I couldn't not say stop it, and those girls were my friends. And you see those things happen, and why do they choose that girl? Because she's different. And why do they choose to be unkind? Because they don't understand her. Or they've heard their parents talk about different races taking over the schools, or some kind of exaggerated opinion about being other and being different.
You have to be conscious of what you say.
Right. So when we're talking about kindness, it has to be deliberate. In that discussion I had with our students last week, I kind of said, think about what you're doing. Are you doing something because it's kind, or have you chosen to not do something because you know it's unkind? Like, it has to be a conscious thought. And I think with teenagers and younger than teenagers, conscious thought is not always the first thing that happens. There are impulses that happen, and when you go to the phone and you go to the computer, you're behind a screen and it's not face to face, so I think it can be even easier to say something that's mean. And I think a lot of bullying starts with just being mean. In those instances, the instance that I'm thinking about from my own high school experience, and just a comment about your hair today or what you're wearing that kids say to each other all the time. And if you aren't able to talk about the deliberateness of those comments towards each other, and you let somebody get too far with being that person, then you're not doing your job as an educator. You have to be able to see it, you have to be able to address it, and you have to be able to call it out and recognize it as meanness and unkindness.
So I'm actually really hopeful that, I don't believe that we're more mean or as a society today. And what gives me hope is what I see in the young people in our clubs, and really in particular what I see among our staff, most of whom are fairly young and new in their careers. The title of this session is cyberbullying, but the fact of the matter is most kids are still bullied in school or in their community face to face. And while I think technology can exacerbate it because thousands of people can, find out about whatever it is, I think what that's done in a positive light is bring awareness to this. I said at the beginning, bullying is something that's repetitive, it's intentional, and it's about power, and it's about an imbalance of power. And, in 2018, we are having some pretty serious conversations about power and how, folks in positions of power use that. And I think that this is very much the same thing. we certainly have a lot of challenges, from inequality, to a host of other things. But I am really hopeful, because I think, young people today are, I think in a lot of ways I see some differences from when I was growing up and how young people talk to each other. I have a brother who has autism and quite frankly was just abused growing up because of it. And it wasn't just kids, it was parents. And it was parents who would say things to me, who would say things to our parents. And, and I look today in so many ways, schools and different communities are so much more inclusive than they were 20, 30 years ago. And I think that that's progress. We're not all the way there. And I think sometimes as we as a society become more diverse and understand these diversities, it's uncomfortable. And, I think we're wrestling with that in pretty serious ways as a society. But I am hopeful about it. I don't know that we would have been having this conversation even 10 years ago. So I think it's good that everybody's here and everybody's is talking about it. I don't think we're more mean as a society. Humans don't evolve that much in, just one generation. So.
Although, looking at the millennials and the Gen Zs, especially this group that came out of the Parkland shooting, that, to me, is where the hope is. Mm-hmm. And they're also savvy politically. They're the ones that are going to get laws changed.
And Jaron, do you see progress as well overall? What Rebecca was talking about.
Actually, for the LGBTQ population, yes, there has been progress. Obviously, marriage won, love won when same-sex marriage was made legal. But look at 2016, the plethora of so-called bathroom bills. Talk about bullying taking place in the restroom. Kids who can't even pee because they're transgender and other people, are othering them there. Look at the court clerks in the Bible Belt refusing to do their job and issuing marriage licenses. These things are noticed by everyone, but especially LGBTQ young people. So, I'm hopeful for this next generation, and the GLAAD and the research, Pew Research did some research that showed that these generations are really more affirming of LGBTQ peers than any other generation. And, to me, that's where the hope really lies.
And I think, when I think about even just being a child, I didn't know anybody really that had come out as, transgender or, I think that wasn't even acceptable to really be a conversation. If you had any sort of disability, you were completely segregated in another school, at least where I grew up. So I think we are as a society.
LGBTQ is not a disability. I just want to make that clear.
No. Oh my gosh, of course not. But I'm saying we are being, confronted as a society, and not necessarily confronted, but, and I speak about people with disabilities just from my own family experience growing up, but that wasn't spoken about at all. It was something that was shameful. And as a result, I didn't ever talk about, growing up, what it was like to, have kids kind of follow you home from school and ask, why was your brother like this, or have other, adults in the community ask me that. Because you didn't talk about that, because it wasn't something that was out in the community. So, so I think one of the things that is hopeful, even though it is difficult to really, move through this, especially, for communities that have any sort of difference, I think that it's good that we're all sitting here talking about it, because that is the first step, is really wrestling with this. So that is what, even though it's challenging, it is something that I see hope in.
I want to pick up on that difficulty in just a little bit, but just a quick reminder here at about 5 minutes before the hour. In about 5 minutes, we want questions from you. So if you'd like to start lining up over there by the microphone, please do. And you can pose a question to our three guests today. We'll start that in just about 5 minutes. Talking about that difficulty and uncomfortable conversations. There was some, I think it's, I read a whole lot of literature leading up to last night's town hall. I think it was from the Columbus School for Girls. And in some of their documents it said, whether it's a school or with social activism or clubs, nonprofit world, whatever, we have to make sure we're creating spaces to have uncomfortable conversations. So how are you three doing that?
Well, PFLAG Columbus is willing to talk to any employer group or church group or social club, any place that parents gather, and of course your coworkers are probably all parents, so we can come in and just, have a conversation that whether people agree or don't agree, at least it's being talked about. So let us know if you want that.
We do several things. We have an advisory period where once a week each class has a community discussion, and our advisory committee will prepare usually something that's centered around one of the values, but a lot of times they will be centered around a current events article that has to deal with inequality in lots of different ways, race, gender. And then we'll also have
the new National Geo issue is fantastic.
I've been reading about that, yes.
Fantastic. It's all about race, April's issue.
And how they have
apologized for their years and years of racism. Awesome.
And then we also have larger group, like panel discussions about race, Me Too, transgender issues, lots of different things.
So part of working for an organization that serves youth is we have, young people will give you really honest opinions and often really profound opinions. So a lot of times it's asking young people, how do you want to be treated? How do you, what kind of environment do you want to have? And encouraging them to, hold themselves and their peers accountable for creating a good environment. There's something on the tables, kind of a mood meter that you guys can look at. One of the things that we do at many of our clubs is just plot yourself on this mood meter. How are you feeling today? And asking kids to, name those feelings and then talk about it. Part of having uncomfortable conversations is actually just talking about it. And how do you feel today? And what are you going to do about it? And what are, your peers going to do to help you? So I think, again, just talking about it, and especially talking to young people about it is critical, because a lot of times adults make decisions on behalf of young people. Oftentimes that's a good thing, but a lot of times we don't consider how we can get young people involved in creating, just a better world.
One of the things that we saw in terms of 10 TV when we started researching our 4 stories that aired in February, we went to Chicago to interview the co-founder of the Cyberbullying Research Center, and their website is cyberbullying.org. One of the reasons why we went to Chicago is he is asked to speak to groups all over the world, but this particular professor was coming to a school district that's doing this. Starting in kindergarten, the kindergarten teacher has a Twitter account for the classroom. And so when they're doing a project or whatever, they're posting messages out in the social world, but what those kindergarten teachers are doing is they're talking about proper ways to post, what should be in a tweet, and you're putting it out there for everyone to see. And so they're walking their kids from kindergarten on in terms of, again, respect and how things should be worded in the social space. And I thought that was pretty remarkable. We have some folks lined up at the microphone. If you would step up, your name and what's your question?
My name is Lindsay Allen. I was at the town hall meeting yesterday, and I just had some follow-up questions. So I'm a youth director at a church in the Powell area. So I serve a lot of the Liberty students. And I know, Jaron, your heart is for the LGBTQ LGBTQ community. And I want you to know, first of all, my worldview is a faith worldview. And when I have students come and tell me their sexuality, their story, I want you to be confident to know that my response to them is always, you are fearfully and wonderfully made by a God that loves you so completely for who you are, as you are loved. So I want you to be confident that there are churches and there are people within those walls that are affirming and loving these kids as well, because I think the church gets, and rightfully so, has had a reputation for vilifying groups of people in really horrendous ways. So I want you to know that there are people speaking up.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you saying that. I think one of the most hurtful things that is said to any LGBTQ person is that we love the sinner, but we hate the sin. And the truth is, it's not a sin. Most people who lift the Bible and try to use it as a bludgeon, they're reading it wrong. And, you know, all the scholars, the top scholars who have gone back to the original language and pulled everything forward, they have actually found that those 6 clobber verses, the ones that are used to beat kids down and make them feel bad about themselves, don't even say what they think they say. And, you know, having been raised Christian myself and having been bloodied in the battle with the United Methodist Church personally, I can tell you that it's really, really important that people who profess to be Christians actually look at Christ and, you know, say, okay, we got 10 commandments, but what's the new commandment? So I'm really glad you're telling kids that, because if they're not hearing it at home and they're not hearing it at church, it's wonderful that they are hearing it from you.
But also, so after Jacob Bice's passing, a group was formulated in the Powell community called Powell Imperfect. And it wasn't saying that Powell itself as a community was imperfect. I think we were all just sick and tired of hiding behind the mask of perfection that is portrayed. And we all just wanted to say, it is okay to be flawed. Let's lead as adults by example. And from this community of parents that have kind of rallied together, one of the things, oh, sorry, did you want to say something?
No, I just flawed. What?
I think she's talking about the parents, right? Not the students.
No, not the students, not the students.
Okay,
sorry. No, we are imperfect. Like, we are not perfect people. But, and it's okay. It's okay to embrace exactly who we are as we are. But one of the things that we have done is we've broken into all of these different groups, to bring in educators, to talk to the parents, to have a student-led initiative. And last week, we met with a group of students, and at the end of the meeting, the kids were giving all of their ideas.
Let me jump in here for just a second.
Sorry.
Do you have a question? Because we have other...
Yes, this is my question.
What's your question?
One of the boys said, do you have, or he said, thank you for giving us a voice. So what I was going to say is, are there plans for the Columbus Metropolitan Club to give more kids a voice where they can come and sit on the panel and share their experiences with bullying and what they think the solution should be?
So, you know, that's probably a question for Jane and maybe not any of us here on the panel.
Jane's right there, as a matter of fact.
But, you know, I'd say, you know, youth voice is always important. And one of the things that will contribute most to a young person having positive experiences in childhood is being given a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, and a sense of usefulness. So, you know, I think the more we do that collectively as a community, belonging, purpose, and usefulness, you know, we will see this elevated.
And they want to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
They absolutely want to be heard. Yep.
So, not to be put on the spot or anything, but I'm Jane Scott.
Sorry, Jane.
No, it's really okay. I think the question is really valid. The Metropolitan Club is open to any discussion and any conversation that rises to the top. Obviously, there are a lot of issues and a lot of discussions that we like to have in this community. So, the answer to that question is probably no, not next week. But in the future, there's a very good opportunity for us to continue this conversation. So
that'd be great. And I know some LGBTQ kids who'd love to be on the panel.
Yeah, and I've been to many, CMC forums where there's a young person on the panel, there's young people in attendance. So again, I don't think we need to get so in the weeds on this particular, forum. But I think all of us are involved in organizations, whether in our neighborhoods or our community. And so I think it's not asking, what are you going to do? What am I going to do to elevate this, to give young people a voice, to support somebody who may be struggling? I think we all need to ask ourselves those questions every single day.
Well, and I would offer up, all of our Metropolitan Club forums are on YouTube. They're videotaped. We go to the trouble to do that so that you all can use them. You can share them, you can link them, you can use them in your church groups, you can use them in your clubs, you can use them in your neighborhoods to be the basis of another conversation. So we want the conversation to continue within your community. So my question is, and please forgive me, I don't mean to be hard-minded about this, but you all are coming at this issue from a safe space perspective. We all know the world is not a safe space. My question to you all, what are you doing, maybe Tony and Rebecca, to follow up a little bit on Jaron's comment that teaching children resilience, teaching them self-esteem so that when they are bullied, they're strong and it bounces off rather than diminishes them or harms them. I'm very concerned about kids that in college, the professors can't talk to them because they might offend them and everything is kind. The world is not a kind and fair place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And those of us in this room might have one perspective, but kids are going to have to live a life in a very, very cruel world. How are we teaching our children resilience?
Yeah, so every single person on our staff goes through a training on how to build resiliency in youth. So, I don't think any of us are under any illusion that we're going to try to make the world safe. What is important, though, is that kids do have a safe place to go, and that when they do face challenges, that they know what to do. So they need to be able to name their emotions and they need to be able to ask for help. We're seeing right now at the Boys and Girls Club, and this kind of is a whole nother level beyond bullying, but we are absolutely seeing a huge increase in gang activity, a huge increase in gun violence in this community. And what we see, and we've seen this for years, but we're seeing it much more often and at much younger ages. Kids are really having to straddle just to protect their own lives and figure out how to navigate neighborhoods where you really have to be affiliated with a gang in some way, but you also want to try to be doing the right thing. And so, we're certainly under no, pretenses that this is a safe world. And I think especially for poor kids, and, we have more poor kids every single day in this country, that they're facing an incredible amount of dangers, but they do need safe places to go. And so, that's what we're going to do. We're going to, help them. I don't think it's about just telling kids to let it bounce off of them, but it's about, naming what these challenges are, letting them know that they have people in their corners, but then also being able to deliver on some hope for the future. If somebody can tell you, oh, let it go, look towards the future, but if you can't see any future that's bright in front of you, what is the hope there? So that is part of, we've got to help young people have a hope for a future that is right now unseen for many people, whether you're experiencing bullying, experiencing some kind of harassment, or just living in a challenging life situation. That's our responsibilities as adults, not just youth workers, to make sure that we help paint that picture, but we also can deliver on that promise.
So we encourage our kids to stand up for each other, one, and to stand up for themselves, too. So in the moment that something's happening, be your own best advocate. But also, we try to create an environment where talking to the teachers and talking to the administration is not considered tattling. So that if you are having an issue with somebody, again, we're creating that safe environment where they can come talk to us. But then once that happens, we're sitting down at a table and we're working through the issues. So it's not like a one-sided conversation with the person that's being bullied and the bully. It will often bring them to a table together with their permission. And sometimes it takes some time to get there, and we allow them that time. But we foster conflict resolution with them, and it's good for both sides. So if you're thinking about zero tolerance, it's just like this person did something and they're out, they're just going to go do that somewhere else. And so if you have to work with the kid that is the aggressor too, and they have to be able to see how they're affecting the other person, and have a chance to kind of reflect. It's like a restorative justice type thing, and try again, and improve and be better and learn. You have to allow for that. If it gets to be pervasive and they're dangerous to somebody, then that's a different story.
And that resilience in children and young people really starts at home. And so if the parent is cognizant of building up the child on all fronts, again, you're a really good friend, you're an awesome kid, let them know when they're doing the right things, and make sure they see themselves as having strengths that are multidimensional.
What's your question?
I'm Erin Cordell, and my question, well, first I want to say the program last night I thought was amazing.
Yes.
It was very insightful and I think well balanced.
Yes.
And the three young ladies were very terrific. They were so brave. I also found it incredibly insightful at the end, because the school is talking about an anonymous hotline that none of those students knew about. And it said to me, we're not involving the students enough, because for many of us, we don't know how to do that. And one of the things I get to do is manage a program that provides grants for low-income, marginalized folks to do systemic change. And the rule is you have to have at least 50% of the people who are affected be the decision makers.
Awesome.
And I think we're not doing that because we don't know how to engage the students. So any insight on that can be used at churches and organizations in the family, I think would be very helpful to us.
I think it's really hard for any large organization, and school districts are large organizations. You have decisions that are made on a leadership level. It's very difficult to get those down to the front line. So to teachers or to aides or to youth workers. I think in any company and any business, that's a challenge. How do you take the values of the organization and make sure that those are cascaded to the front line? So I think we see here, those are kind of management challenges and leadership challenges that I'm sure you're struggling with, Tony, and thinking about constantly. We're thinking about how does every single person in our organization live our values? And that's a challenge. And I think probably what happened last night is we just saw some of that play out. But I'm glad that I heard several people kind of talking about that and how do we do that better? And, these systems and systemic change is all about driving continuous improvement, not figuring out what's perfect and making sure it's perfect. We just constantly have to be asking questions about how we can improve and make it better.
And when you're in a school, you have access to your students, and get them at a table and sit down and talk to them. And whether or not it's a formal process of, we're going to take everything that you say and implement it, because that's impossible. Mm-hmm. You can filter it, and you hear the messages they're sending and the things that they're saying, and you can kind of make it a conglomerate of, let's address all of these issues that we're hearing that are similar or that maybe have common solutions. And at an administrative level, you've got to take that feedback from all aspects and thread it through.
Mm-hmm. We've got two more questions. What's your question, sir?
Real quickly, my question is kind of about role models. When I was growing up and I was raising my kids, I remember when I was a kid, if I got an A, somebody would say, boy, that kid's going to be president. And kids wanted to be president, or they wanted to be a movie star, or they wanted to be an athlete. And when we've got a president calling women opponents ugly and people stupid, which sounds like bullying to me, how do parents and leaders counter that in influencing children?
I think our role models need to be the immediate people in front of us, not the people on TV. And I think that that's hard to accomplish, but I think parents and schools have a job to educate their kids to, that's fake.
Yes.
Not to use a euphemism, but that's a screen. You don't know that person. They're not a role model to you. The person in front of you is a role model to you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes,
sorry.
I was going to say, when parents saw the president making fun of disabled people, they should have turned to their kids right then and said, never want to see that from you.
Or
That's
turn
wrong.
the TV off.
Or turn the TV off, yes. But anytime any injustice is made apparent, the parent needs to speak up, and it's a teachable moment, every single one.
Yeah, and I mean, kids are still most influenced by their parents, so your own behavior is absolutely important. I think just as a parent myself, but also as somebody who leads a youth serving organization, I think it's really important to be honest with kids. So I talk to my kids about times in my life when I have said hurtful things to people or been a bystander of bullying. Because look, we've all done it, right? At some point in our lives, and we're not proud of it, but talk to them about it, be honest about it, and how did it make you feel, and what do you regret about that, and what do you wish, what do you know now that you wish you'd known at that point in time? So I think, it is a teachable moment to watch what happens in politics now and say, well, what do you think about that? How do you feel? Do you think that would, feel good to have somebody say that about you? So, I think rather than hide it, just, being open about it, I think kids really appreciate it. And, the kids we serve in the club, they are so savvy and, they see things, they can, their BS detector is really, really strong. So, we try to just have those conversations, and get them to identify feelings as part of it.
As somebody who hosts our weekly public affairs / political show, I'd love to get at your question, sir, but I think we'd have to stay here for 3 or 4 more hours. I'm game if everybody else is to get at that. But I think we do have one more question to get to, and then we've got to wrap up the day.
Pressure is on. I am Joby Krantz. Tony, I loved what you were saying about your class meetings. Mm-hmm. Could you tell me a little bit about the size of your school in relation to the fact that I'm looking at a school that's about 2,200 students?
We're smaller.
I love the dialect and the discussion and the conversation, and it seems like a nice family feel.
It is.
But how can we apply that to the districts that are in the Columbus area?
Yeah, I guess you'd have to break it up into smaller groups and maybe be deliberate about who you're putting together and what you're trying to accomplish with the conversation. So our classes, we have 400 students in our school, and each class is about 100, so it's easy to put 100 kids in a room and let them and have a forum with them. But yeah, that is a challenge. Mm-hmm. So I think looking at it from just breaking them up, but also I think that you could put a class together and allow for a town hall style thing with 400 kids at once if you have the space to do it.
Yeah. What we've seen in Boys and Girls Clubs when we track this optimal club experience data, when you get past a club that has an average daily attendance of about 150, that's where you start to see a dip in that optimal club experience. And so what we're really experimenting with right now is how do you create these smaller these smaller communities within larger communities. And we actually find that our clubs that have the highest percentage of optimal club experience are actually in public housing sites. And so figuring out what is it about those, the more we can just ask these questions and keep trying things, we're going to keep learning. So any way you can create some smaller communities, look, you might not knock it out of the park the first time, but try it, right? And get feedback from kids.
And maybe a model for district schools to follow to try to
please provide that.
Do things a little bit different. We're trying.
As we wrap it up today, if we could, Jaron, starting with you, maybe just a final thought, a line or two of what you would like to leave with this crowd today.
Okay, thank you, Scott. What I'd like to leave with the crowd is the acronym CARE. C for consciousness. Be conscious of what you're saying around your children and young people everywhere. A, advocate. So go into the schools, into your church, into your workplaces, all of those extended family members. Make sure you're educating them. R for resilience, and I think I've touched on that more than once. Make sure you are upholding your child as a whole child, not just one aspect of who they are. And E for equality. So we've got to have equal rights written into the Ohio Code. It's got to become law. HB 160 has already had 2 hearings, and basically all it does is extend to LGBTQ people as a class of citizens all of the rights that are already spelled out for everyone else based on all of the usual things, race, gender, creed, color, all of those, abilities, veteran status, all of that. The only group excluded from equal protection under the law are LGBTQ people. What does that say to our young people? So again, talk to Equality Ohio and get on board with Ohio Business Competes. I think that's going to go a long way on many fronts for the LGBTQ community and the families who love them.
I think, while you were asking your question, I was thinking about biases. And I think that we all need to be continually willing to look at our own biases and reflect on what those are and do active work on breaking away from them and thinking about how you're teaching the people around you to be biased or how you're engaging with your own communities in a biased way, and just being aware of it and being conscious of it and being willing to push yourself past it.
And I just say emotional intelligence, think about it, practice it, model it for our young people.
My final thought for the crowd will be, if you didn't see our town hall last night, go to our website and click on it, because we were talking about the need, you were talking about students that need to be heard, need to navigate an unfair world. You will not be able to turn away from the first 10 minutes, I guarantee you, when you see these 3 girls, high school girls.
And when they came back at the end.
And when they came back at the end, how poised, how cerebral they were, and how real they were in describing depression, mental health challenges, and every one of these girls tried to kill themselves. You can't turn away. And they are so powerful in their resiliency, didn't you think?
Amen.
And
yes.
So I invite you to go watch that, and then we'll all go home and hug our kids a little bit tighter, and maybe even call our parents, call mom and dad and thank them too. So with that, why don't we turn it back over to Mindy?
I'd second Scott's urging you to go and watch that forum. That town hall. It was quite powerful last night, just as today's forum was really powerful. You can view and share today's forum and all of our forums on CTV Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. So please help me thank our partners, WBNS 10 TV, and of course our speakers, Jaron Terry, Tony Gatto, Rebecca Asmo, and Scott Light. And thanks to all of you for being here. We look forward to seeing you at CMC next week when we talk about the weather.